Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We will start shortly. We'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to join, and then we kick it off.
Hope you're all super excited. Let us know in the chat.
Work. How to make.
Awesome. Good energy, Dominic. Great. So we can give some more time to people joining since no one is going to be there exactly at 5 o'clock normally. So Frank is typing.
So 5 p.m. Let's give a few more seconds, and we are ready to give it a go today.
Cheers. Yeah, Frank, exactly. This is all about learning events. So as well, if you have some comments during the session or you have thoughts of your own, definitely share. We're super curious as well to hear what you guys think.
Okay, and I guess with that, let's give it a go. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm super happy to have all of you on board, and I'm also super happy to present together with my colleagues Jeroen, Thibaut, and Adnana today's webinar. My name is Florian Feicht. I'm responsible for the practice, for the platform engineering practice here at Visium, and yeah, super happy to welcome everyone on stage. So a few words on Visium. Jeroen, if you go to the next slides. What is Visium actually doing? We are supporting our customers in unlocking value out of AI. And with more than 70 experts across Europe, we are able to really support our customers end to end, from strategy and management consulting to AI engineering to platform engineering. And today, essentially, it's also about the combination of our practices and of our focus areas. So that's why I'm super happy to have the chance to open this webinar today. We have more than 250 AI and data engagements across Europe, and with more than 50 happy enterprise clients. And yeah, with that, I love to give it over to Thibaut to start with your introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Thibaut Viglino. I've been with Visium for about 4.5 years now, working as a software architect. I'm also have a background in machine learning, so I'm very interested in how AI works in all that, and I'm basically looking at the frontier of software and data and how is all interfaces. I'm also very interested in, let's say, the coding tools that emerge, what they do well, what they do very not well. So that's why I'm here with Jeroen to talk about that today.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Thibaut. So hi guys, I'm Jeroen. I'm principal data engineer here at Visium. I'm working with all kind of analytics technologies from Azure Data Platform, Databricks, DBT, etc. You name it. So I'm touching most of the AI solutions in data engineering as well. And that's why we're here right now to share a bit of our vision on AI and data engineering. On that note, let's kick things off. So in general, please use the chat if you have questions, if you have comments, etc. It would be amazing to have a bit of an interactive session. And as always, we hope you learn something from this and get a bit from our vision on this. So let's get on the same page. I don't know what everyone is doing work-wise, so let's make sure everything is equal. When we talk about AI in data engineering, we really need to talk about what actually is an LLM. What are we talking about when we work with LLMs? Now, LLM in its basics is just a very, very complex statistical reasoning based on huge amounts of data. And that makes it absolutely an expert at guessing the correct logical sequence, whether it's natural language, just English, German, Dutch, or whether it's code-based. And that's why we call it a stochastic parrot, because it basically repeats everything what it's learned based on statistics that go underneath it. And what you see over the years happening is that it's continuously improving through bigger models, bigger data sets, training data sets, etc. And that's causing it to be more functional. That said, sometimes, of course, AI solutions and LLM solutions get a bit oversold. What an LLM really isn't, it's not part of a deterministic workflow that yields the same result every time. It's not a standard function that gives you input and output that's every time the same. It doesn't actually understand your input, and it doesn't have like a perfect contextual awareness. Yet again, it's a statistical approximation. And as you'll see in many tools, it's not always a reliable source of knowledge. This is good to keep in mind, because this is as well the coat hanger that we'll have with the rest of the session of what LLMs actually can do and what they really aren't that good at. So in general, the way I like to look at it is treat your AI agent as if he was a 12-year-old who just tried a sugary coffee for the first time. So LLMs tend to be very enthusiastic. They always want the next input to come in, and they want to engage in the conversation. They want to be useful, but you're not always going to get the best responses from an LLM, even though he's trying his very best. Now, on that note, let's take it back again to data engineering, and let's look at some of the things that are draining our energy. Not so much what takes the most time, but what's actually draining our mental energy. First of all, of course, repetition. As you'll see in many analytics solutions, you're constantly rebuilding similar tables, similar products. Second, that's more of an organizational part, getting everyone familiar with the technology that exists. We see that in many of our clients as well, that tech stack can actually make things quite complex. Number three, adapting existing data models to cascading changes. Of course, whenever you touch something, the changes are going to cascade, and that's going to drive some complexity. Making small changes with huge impact. Data solutions governance as a fifth, that takes some more explanation, that's more the soft side, the business focused side, and doing simple Python, but doing a lot of variants of Python. So LLMs are good at some things, but not in others. So at repetition, it's absolutely amazing. If you have some, for example, SQL or some Python that you want to repeat it over different tables, you have a standard setup, it's going to be really great at doing that, because you have the framework basically set in stone already. And yeah, LLMs pick that up quite easily. Same with adapting existing data models or cascading change can work really well as well, because still you're working within a very tight-knit governance. And simple Python is quite easy, because naturally you can talk to LLM quite easily into delivering these Pythons, especially given that you can give the context and the output is very expected. That said, of course, when it comes more organizational, getting everyone familiar with chosen technology, an LLM can provide help for it, but it mostly circles around just general ChatGPT, etc. usage. The same with data governance. It can be helped, but these are more organizational topics. Lastly, making small changes with huge impacts. That is where you will see hallucinations, etc. moving in quite quickly. So let's dive a bit deeper into that. To do that, let's define two workflows that we have as data engineers, but engineers in general. I'm using a bit facetious language. So first theme is vibe coding. We don't have anything yet. I'm just opening my cursor or anything like that, and I am just going to generate all of the code through the application. And that's great because I don't need to have any knowledge beforehand. I can go really, really quickly into prototypes, and I'm able to develop outside my skill sets. As a personal example, I can do some Python, but I'm not that good at JavaScript, etc. So with vibe coding, that suddenly becomes possible. That does mean, however, yeah, it is non-deterministic, and that means that you're going to run into a high level of hallucination, amnesia, etc. So you're going to run into the very stereotypical issues around LLMs. That said, when we look at the other side, what I call efficiency maxing, it's more what you will see in the data engineering workspace. Though, of course, very often we do see still a bit of vibe coding going on. But that means is we have the framework already set in stone, we have the tools, we know what we want, we have already delivered some code, but we want to adapt code. We want to repeat code, like we mentioned in the previous slide. That's actually very, very doable. You can get very high levels of accuracy. You can have a very clear code understanding by the LLM, and you can actually rapidly increase productivity. That said, this is quite the opposite of vibe coding. It requires quite a lot of initial work. It requires you to properly set up the framework, do some of the development work already yourself, and basically you're driving it to the home stretch rather than the actual prototyping. So it's way more focused on repetition tasks. If there's any points, of course, please go to chat and ask your questions or make comments, and we'll try to get to you as soon as possible. That said, regardless if you're going to do vibe coding, you are going to run into vibe coding or efficiency maxing, you're going to run into the following things. So context is absolutely going to kill you. LLMs, they tend to have quite a low understanding of the environments. So the bigger the environment is going to be, also the environment that you work in, the more hallucinations actually start happening. So when it's very direct, when you have very simple solutions, they tend to work quite okay, but the more complex a solution gets, the more the context actually becomes complex and more difficult it will become. As such, many of the online tutorials you see mostly focused around simple streams, simple solutions, rather than entire enterprise-grade solutions. Secondly, especially in data engineering, this is quite difficult. LLMs will undoubtedly start hallucinating. The LLM will take a business context and then interprets that and adds to the data model. This is from the statistical reasoning again. The LLM thinks, hey, we're talking about finance, we're talking about a star schema, that means these columns, I expect definitely there, which might not be the case. This is going to happen. I've encountered it many, many times, even in very, very repetitive tasks. So the result is that you're very likely going to see columns that don't even exist. Architecture also makes a difference. If you have multiple tools, you have a lot of outside peripherals, a lot of outside systems. This is going to be, yet again, for the similar to the context, this is going to be very, very painful because you will need to constantly prompt your LLM to make them understand, hey, understand that you're working in a broader context than just this code base, which is quite difficult. The fourth part, it might be a bit of an open door, but it's quite important. It depends what's possible at your job. For example, Cursor might not be compliant to companies' governance standards. And that sounds, of course, a bit, too heavy-handed, but I'll get into this at the end. There might be bigger reasons for this, but the result of this is that you end up copy-pasting everything into ChatGPT, and for the people that experience this, this is quite a miserable experience, except if you're just doing singular pieces of code. Thibaut, you have something to say about this, I think.
Yeah, I also wanted to share a little bit of my experience in these caveats, more from the software engineering side, let's say, just to give a bit more concrete examples. First of all, about the context, something I've noticed is that, I mean, it is well documented that as the context becomes more filled up, the LLMs tend to sort of lose track of what's in the middle. So a best practice in the end is to sort of clear your memory, restart a new session, or whatever you can do with your tool. But what I've noticed, I was working on this website where there was a daily pipeline that would match daily news with sort of historical archives. And whenever I was working with it using only my LLM, because it was a personal project, so I didn't care, I just wanted to see what happened, it tended to always forget to push back my changes to production and things like that. So, and just because it was lost in the middle. So what I ended up doing was to try to use this external memory framework. So I just wanted to share about that the context is not only what's in the current conversation, but you also have solutions to sort of enhance. But this is all very active development. Maybe something else I can mention about hallucination. On the same project, the data pipeline was very clear to what fields were nullable and things like that. But the LLMs did not believe that sometimes. So it can introduce all these sort of checks for example, for trying to check if something is none, do something, and then you end up with this very high complexity, which is a complexity for you as the human, but also for the LLM itself when it tries. So that's why you need to sort of keep an eye on all what's happening. And maybe a last example, I was also trying to write a framework that was built around agents, so to sort of orchestrate agents, same as what CrewAI does for those who might know that tool. And I mentioned a very little word. I said, hey, make it open to other frameworks. And it sort of latched on that. So, and started to build this very complex architecture around that. So what Jeroen mentioned about complex architecture, trying to make everything extremely abstract based on one single word I put. So sometimes the single word in your prompts can change everything. So that's why you sort of need to pay attention to what the output. And with experience, I guess you sort of understand, oh, maybe I shouldn't add this precision because I know the LLM is going to latch on that and going to invest on that. So that's all the sort of little caveats I wanted to add to that. And yeah, you can take it back.
Just exactly adding on top of that, think about this, it's statistics. So exactly like Thibaut said, if you have a factor that's considered to be very important, it's basically going to hijack your entire input. So that's a really good point, Thibaut. So let's get some of the basics on where we're going to start. What the first recommendation would be from our side is get a good code editor like Cursor or using Cloud Code with Visual Studio, for example. I'm way more a fan of Cursor, while Thibaut tends to be more with Cloud Code and Visual Studio, but use those environments to do your development work. This is a bit of a personal choice. Cloud Code is amazing right now, but Cursor provides the flexibility to move between the different models. That's a very high recommendation. Move to some tooling environment that actually works with you. That's the easy one. The second part that is a bit more difficult. Create a technical architectural document and vision document so that the LLM understands the context of what you're working, and spec it tends to be quite good. So in general, what you want to do is provide input in requirements documentation, architectural documentation, etc., for the LLM to get a better understanding of your code base, a better understanding of the environment, and a better understanding with the vision document, for example, of what you are trying to do. And yes, it's likely going to burn through more tokens, but you want the most concrete result from this. So token per prompt might not say everything. Thirdly, you will want to, of course, add as much documentation about the solution that you're working with, because links to documentation, websites, etc., are going to be incredibly vital. So, for example, I work with a DBT solution, and what I do is I add all the documentation from DBT, all the links, to my documentation base, because that allows the LLM to immediately go to look for the standard documentation that there is around the subject, and thus improving its knowledge, and as well, limiting, let's say, its scope and driving a bit more where it should be going. So I can definitely recommend that. Fourth, and that's probably the most important thing, yet again, what you tend to see online is very much someone writes an amazing prompt, and it just spits out a piece of software. This is kind of like hacking in movies. It's like someone whacking on their keyboard and some magic happens. It just, in real life, it just doesn't work like this. The recommendation is very much try to get small pieces done. If you ask for a very big thing, very likely it's going to give an approximation of that thing. But you're not going to be able to ask an LLM to code, for example, GTA 5 for you and expect the right result. No, you need to go feature by feature by feature. So you as well need to have a very good understanding of what those features are that you're trying to deliver. Thibaut.
Yeah, so you mentioned all these sort of documentation that you need to produce, and I wanted to emphasize that you can sort of use the tools that you have on step one to sort of create as well all this documentation. Something that tools like Code, for example, are good at is also producing bash commands, for example. And there are a great tool, for example, if you say, I'm working on this environment, can you explore it? You could even allow it to sort of do read comments on your different databases to sort of build up a schema to sort of understand what's in there. You can use it. You can take screenshots, for example, of whatever your dashboard is with all the different resources, and use it really in that way to sort of create all that, so that it's not, so that your work does not only become trying to describe what you want, but also letting the machine not only code, but also try to gather information. And I think that's very important. And maybe a note on that, it may seem like we are spending a lot of time on doing all these definitions, but that's actually true. Like LLMs are super fast at coding. They can produce way more code in seconds than human can, but they're not that great at producing the right one if they don't have the right context. So I would say now my projects are more like 90% time doing research with LLMs or by myself and just putting everything together, and then in the end having this sort of boost in productivity.
Yeah, thanks, Thibaut. So some good points. In general, as well, like Thibaut mentioned, the LLMs tend to go sometimes into a bit of a rabbit hole. And it's quite difficult for LLMs to discard some of the code that has already been written, and thus it adjusts the priority based on that. Now, some trick that I actually learned very recently, some trick to handle with this, LLMs apparently are competitive. So if you're using Cloud Code and you tell Cloud Code, hey, this piece of code has been written by Gemini or has been written by ChatGPT, please give feedback, etc., or adjust accordingly, etc. It tends to sniff out quite a lot of the LLM related things. So I can recommend, if you're in an environment where you can use multiple models, or if you can basically bluff your way and say, hey, this code was written by another LLM, it tends to work really, really well into breaking those rabbit holes. Feel free anyway to lie towards your LLM about who made what, whether you made it, an LLM made it, or whatever. Use that according to your benefit. So to dive into the more data engineering specific things, to make technical recommendations, I have a very strong bias for DBT. The reason for this is within the LLM context is because it's incredibly well defined. It does one thing very specifically. And for those of you who don't know, DBT stands for Data Build Tool. And effectively what it does all the analytics engineering. So everything from bronze up until the gold layers. So all the modeling of the data, the transformations, etc., can all be done in DBT. And because it's so very well scoped and it has a very active community, it helps the LLM learn from this. And one of the benefits as well that we see compared to some free frameworks is, of course, there is DBT Cloud. And DBT Cloud is a paid solution, quite an expensive one at that. That said, though, because it's paid and because many bigger companies use DBT Cloud, effectively DBT Core, which is the open source solution, is bankrolled by the cloud solution that DBT Labs has. So this is an environment that's very much in development and very active, which makes it great to use with an LLM. Secondly, define your data models. The moment you start asking broader question, please define my data models or do data modeling for me, that tends to go quite poorly. And the moment that you define your data models, and especially going from the user-facing data models all the way back to the bronze, that will actually give you a good framework for the LLM to work with, because then the LLM focuses way more on connecting those data models and connecting those steps rather than basically inventing the universe. As well, recommendation with your data models, with the transformation, etc., add the documentation about that. Yet again, that pushes the LLM way more at producing code rather than producing actual logic or definitions. Lastly, I can really recommend using opinionated solutions. And I named as an example AutomateDV, which is a DBT framework for creating data vaults. Now, you don't need to use AutomateDV or the model in data vaults in general, but I can recommend those standardized and opinionated solutions that do a specific thing with a specific mindset. Because the more restrictive, as we've told over and over right now, the more restrictive something comes, the more it guides the user, the better an LLM actually will work with this. And it helps you as well with understanding what you as a LLM user need to describe. So an example for if we would dive into a DBT project, yet again, by the way, guys, if there's any questions, just type in the chat, or if you guys don't agree or do agree, let us know in the chat and we can respond to that. So an example for DBT would be installing DBT agent skills. Effectively, it's what you can do, for example, in Cursor, that adds basically the knowledge around DBT into your development environment so that the LLM can easily use that without referring to the documentation that is online and that it needs to go through. This is very, very valuable. Secondly, creating documentation about project vision in .md files, making sure that you have requirement documentations, that you have the exact tables that you want, the source definition, the columns, etc., internal documents, that you have everything available in the project. And with certain tools, for example, yet again, if you use Cursor, you will want to generate .mdc files in a Cursor folder, because that actually forces Cursor to look at those files every time there's going to be an execution. And this is something I can really recommend, and that you'll notice you'll start building the more you work with LLMs, that you have project files that it goes through again and again and again. For example, code standards, ways that DBT works, testing, test development, what you're expecting the result to be, etc., standard code sniffs. That can be very valuable. Yet again, it will cost some more tokens, but it's going to improve the quality like no tomorrow. Like I said, for that, the LLM instructions in Cursor, that's .mdc. In Cloud Code, I think Thibaut can explain that a bit more. But yeah, that would be definitely my recommendation. Go for an opinionated solution, go for DBT, and make sure that you have everything properly described. Thibaut, can you say something about this?
Yeah, exactly. So where you put that in Claude is Claude.md, just for reference. But I totally agree with what Jeroen said. And even more than opinionated solution, I think it's there's so many tools that have been developed for software engineering that people use all the time, linters, parsers, everything. And it's way better to try to use them behind an LLM than to try to make the LLM, for example, check for the linting. I mean, it's a waste of token. It's not as good. But if you make it run your linter and then check the output, that's where it gets very powerful. And something I also wanted to add is that to create those markdown file or MDC files, there's also you may have noticed on the internet that every site, every documentation starts to have these little copy buttons, which are basically designed for you to copy paste stuff in LLMs, and sometimes they download as markdowns. And also sometimes you will find a website that have a /llm.txt or a similar address, which is basically a map of all the documentation that the LLM can sort of fetch by itself if your LLM has fetch capabilities, which is highly encouraged if you can get it, because that helps so much for that. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to add there.
Yeah, really cool. Completely agree. Actually, it's something I've learned recently as well, and Thibaut, maybe you could say something about that as well. I've actually started using LLMs to generate the LLM instructions. That one can work really well because you tend to know what you want from the LLM, but you might have a difficult time saying it, or you're not known with the technology, etc. And an LLM can actually generate those LLM instructions, and then you add those in your project. Have you found that to work quite well for you as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of means that LLMs are not transitive, right? You cannot write an answer and expect the LLM to sort of expand, because as you said, it's a statistical machine, so it needs to have actually the word in the prompt to produce the good result. But it's great at producing this interpolation. So sometimes I've done like research with ChatGPT and tell it, hey, could you write this as a prompt for Claude now? And that tends to work quite a lot. So I agree with that.
Yeah, really cool. So in general, I've added a bit of screen. So this is what your project can look like. So this is a project that I'm working on in my time. And effectively, you can see on the left in the repository that we have cursor and rules, different files, different MDC files describing the rules that I want cursor to follow. The skills, as we described, so for example, the DBT skills, but as well having a folder, a reference folder. I add requirements to it. So I have for the different pages that I have different requirements. For different solutions that I have different requirements. But something that works quite well as well is adding personas, adding the person that is supposed to use the solution, adding the description of that person to the LLM, because yet again, that gives the LLM context of what you're trying to achieve. Everything that we want to do is push the LLM into the right direction and make sure that it doesn't go off on a trail by itself, but that it understands what your objectives are with tools. So that means as well for to make it more specific for the data engineering in finance, that you make sure the LLM understands what finance roles are supposed to be reading the data model, or in HR, etc., who are supposed to read. Are they C-level? Are they SQL developers, etc.? Because that helps with the development of the solution. Okay, now a bit into where are we right now and where are we going into the future? And I am very, very curious what you guys think. So as well, if any one of you thinks something different, let us know, and you can tell us as well with camera on. We can give you the rights for that. But from our vision, okay, the here and right now within data engineering and AI. AI works really, really well for repeating things that you've done before, but supplying it for other tables. So basically, the framework you've done, the efficiency maxing, that is really, really good. It can also scaffold projects really well for well-described projects. And in a sense, we notice really, really well that the LLMs are speeding up our work consistently. To give you a bit of an idea, one of our clients, we need to move the code base from PySpark into dbt. I could not have done that work as quickly as with an LLM, because yeah, it helps majorly if the goal is clear for the LLM what you're trying to do. For the near future, however, we're already seeing, for example, in Databricks, more integrations with actual data platform, with the databases and the tables. And LLMs will be able to be more clearly identify the source DDL, so it will be able to understand what actually the target is without just looking at your code. And LLMs are becoming way more integrated in our landscape. So it will improve the ability for LLMs to understand the context, understand the architecture that it's dealing with, rather than just look at your code base and look at your documentation from this. The third point, data governance solutions like Purview and Unity Catalog will become vital in describing data and relations. So, of course, you have solutions where during the ETL, you can describe the data, you can describe the relationships, etc. However, if you have a business team that is working within Purview, working within Unity catalog, etc., and that can describe all of the data that exists there. That gives a wealth of context for your LLM and thus improving it. However, of course, we come here with as well the data governance part of the story that we mentioned earlier on using LLMs for your data solutions. Do note that it's not always clear, and we've seen cases, of course, in this industry happening, that the LLM prompts are just completely open and readable for the company that hosts it. For example, on Gemini, on ChatGPT, etc. So, and we've seen as well, I think in court cases even, that the company behind it, openly looks at the data provided. That means that if your company says like, hey, we can't allow the usage of LLMs like this, there is a reason for that. And this needs to, of course, develop over the coming years. We need to see where this is heading. But this is very much a limiting factor right now that is kind of under developed, I would say. You don't hear that many people about it, but that could be a very severe risk for the improvement of LLMs, of the improvement of using LLMs in daily practice. Now, that said, for the future, for the eventual equilibrium where we kind of expect it to land, is the user shift way more from writing deep SQL code or Python code and focusing way more on the definition of the data models and the logical intermediary steps. And that can very easily happen with the cooperation with the business. It will be in a format that is easy to use both by the business and easy to read through by an LLM. And given that the adoption of LLMs is increasing, we as well expect that the context understanding of the environment is going to severely increase over the years, and thus increasing the power of LLMs. We expect very much that work is going to be spent way more on data modeling and their query reviews rather than building the logic from the ground up in SQL. So in general, my conclusion would be AI really won't take your job, but data architecture will be absolutely key. You need to understand data modeling better. You need to understand the more meta aspect of data engineering rather than just writing the SQL queries, because this is where the actual difficulty lies, and as well where the difficulty for LLMs will still remain to be. That said, we are coming now to the end of our presentation. We are very curious if you guys have some questions, comments, etc. And you can use the QR code to send some questions. I see Frank already typing something. 73% of enterprise AI projects never move beyond pilot stage. How do you, as Visium, address this to increase the likelihood of more successful pilots to gain trust, credibility with your client? Thibaut, is this something you would like to address? And Florian, I think you have opinions about this as well.
Yeah, Florian, do you want to take it?
Florian.
Yeah, sure. I think we absolutely agree with you, Frank, on that quite many of the enterprise AI projects never make it to production. And that has essentially several reasons. And one of the reasons is of course the data quality, which is needed to really make an AI application enterprise ready. And with that, as Jeroen also mentioned, having a good data architecture is absolutely key for that in order to build use cases based on these data. The second topic is really auditability and traceability on that, to make everyone really having the trust in the outcomes. With that, it's of course also important to have an evaluation framework in place for the LLMs and also for the agentic workflows on that, which is also like super important to make it eventually to production. Thibaut, anything to add from your side?
No, not really. I think you define it well. I think, well, yeah, I think for me, the main part is truly understanding what the people want. I think if I had to boil that to one sentence is not implementing right away the AI use case the people want, but trying to understand what they want and if and how we can solve it with AI. That's my short answer.
To pull it as well in the more data engineering workspace, it helps for us as data engineers that we tend to not create, let's say, AI solutions, but we consume way more of the AI solutions. So what we tend to do is we follow very, very closely to the industry, to Databricks, Snowflake, etc., what they are building on their solutions, and try to as well adapt based on that. So we really want to leverage LLMs and AI solutions as much as we can as well where it's developing, and we're seeing a very clear course where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Frank. Also on the change management, I think that also comes to what Thibaut just mentioned. Essentially, it's important to tackle the right use cases and not what is just possible because technology is there, right? Really try to think about what brings value to the business and then take the people with you, which is like super important. And also on the cloud infra, essentially that's sometimes a blocker which we see on our project, but I would really highlight data quality, evaluation frameworks, and also change management as like the top priorities why AI projects are failing in enterprise.
On that, I see a question from Stefan as well, and
Yeah.
Florian, I think you're going to have an interesting response to this. Stefan says, do you see clients preferring to first define and establish a responsible AI framework and then start implementing AI solutions, or vice versa?
So typical consultant answer, it depends, of course. But what we see out there in the different industry, and what we also recommend, is to start with a clear strategy, right? That you can tackle your challenges also according to your compliance requirements, responsible AI requirements, and so on and so forth. That's super important to have, and also combining a bit to what Frank proposed before, to make it really enterprise ready. For that, that's key, because then otherwise you really have a high risk of losing it in a pilot stage. So really start with the framework and the strategy, and then implement enterprise ready AI solutions based on that.
But to add to that, I've also seen some different customers also wanting to have some sort of at least proof of concept or something that is fast there, that quickly shows the value. That's also useful for internal discussions. Like, do we want to go further? So, but as always, I think that's the same with software, right? You tend to have these that can become production if you're not ready to fight for it, not to become it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also quite important, right? So if you start developing a pilot, make your target quite clear. What are you aiming for? Is it just for demonstration purpose, or do you eventually want to move it to production? And that's like a completely different situation and scenario. And fully agree with you, Thibaut. We sometimes we just need to show and somehow to inspire also like business and stakeholders and so on, to show them what is actually possible. But of course, also clear communication is important, that the pilot is not necessarily production ready.
Yeah. To answer that and to pull it again a bit into the data engineering side of things, I always like to compare it a bit to GDPR. GDPR as well, when it came out, was quite complex, and as well, if you're as a company doing GDPR compliancy for the first time, it can be quite complex. And not just to toot our own horn, but it helps talking with people who've gone through the circus multiple times to get a bit of a feeling of like, hey, where's the border? Where are we going? Going left and right, etc. So I would, besides having a chat with us, I would really recommend talking with industry peers who are trying to do the same thing or have done the same thing to learn from the experiences of people before, because it's always going to be, a balance in that.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add to the compliance by design discussion that's in the comments. As we also now see some even parts of pipelines that are becoming LLM based, right? That are sort of, for example, extracting information to create structured data from non-structured. I think it's even more important there because it's such a versatile tool that you can sort of constrain, and you get sort of this confidence in it following your rules, right? But you really need to back it down with some hard rules. So you really need to think through what can the model access at this point. This has been standard practice for anything, but it's even more important now because there is this non-determinism in there. So you never know what could happen, and also it's also a place where people could attack if somehow they could, in the data that the LLM is processing, ingest some sort of adversarial prompt. That's also something you need to keep your eyes open for.
Yeah. And Frank mentioned, I agree, governance is key. If you haven't thought through, e.g. weak compliance, missing audit trails, etc., you might be fast in prototyping, which is good. However, you are at risk of spending weeks and weeks to re-architect proof concept after. Yeah, definitely. In general as well, it's important to, first of all, of course, when you start something, to time box properly, like, hey, how much time are we going to spend? But then repetitively go back into the subject to adapt what you've made in the beginning. To try to do it perfectly in the beginning immediately is not going to, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. While at the same time, you want something to start with, because of course there needs to be some in the DNA of the solution that you're working with, because otherwise you have nothing to iterate on. Frank as well said there's great training also on deeplearning.ai on governing AI agents that exactly talks about Stefan Ray's point. Super cool. Awesome. Definitely share as well those links in the chat for all of us to use. Definitely. Thanks so much, Frank.
Awesome. So if there are any last questions from you, please feel free to share it. We are also, of course, available later on. Feel free to reach out, use the QR code to contact us. We are also happy to share our contact data. So, yeah.
Last question maybe, or a question still from Stefan. Any tips re token usage reduction as they appear to become the bandwidth of the 2020s?
Yeah, maybe I can take this one.
Yes.
That's a big talk. I mean, there are some. First of all, there are some techniques. For example, if you run, don't forget that all these APIs have batch APIs, for example. That's a good way to reduce costs rather than token reduction. Also, I've seen some people trying to go around and sort of compress the text, because LLMs are kind of good at doing translation. If you give them a map, say you say, hey, can you translate this to, they're good at translation basically. And some people are trying to say, hey, okay, can you just write half of all the long words with the dots, because I know what they mean. And it is surprisingly efficient. So there are, I've seen many sort of artisanal kind of techniques that people are trying to use, and I have no doubt that it's going to become, there's going to be libraries and standard practices soon. I'm not aware of big ones yet. There's also prompt caching. That's something, if you reuse a prompt, that's a very important one to use as well. Even though it's not the same output you're going to get, the prompt caching can also make your token cost less important. I don't know if the others have other tricks. Feel free also to share in the chat if you have any.
Yeah, for me, but this is purely a personal experience. I would recommend over-describing a bit maybe in the beginning, and making sure you get quality responses, because First of all, LLMs, of course, like we described, can go into a bit of a loop or into a rabbit hole that is going to burn through your tokens way, way quicker than any of the context that you're adding is going to do. Secondly, as well, just purely psychologically, because the moment that an LLM is going into a direction that you don't want it to go, course correcting it, etc., through prompts is going to be quite cumbersome and is going to be a difficult experience. So what I tend to do is that every piece of, let's say, information that's not just like an assignment, but any description or whatever, I move out of a prompt and into my documentation so that it becomes part of the knowledge base rather than something that I need to repeat, etc. And hopefully trying to funnel it constantly into the right direction. I kind of see it like a pinball machine, and you're adding bumpers to make sure it goes into the right direction more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Jeroen. Thanks, Thibaut. So with that, let's close the session for today. Thanks a lot all for joining in today. We hope you found it interesting. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any additional questions, and enjoy your evening. We will send out the recording to everyone. You will have it available. So once again, thanks a lot for joining in today, and have a great evening.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.